I found the recent meta centered on some of the one-year anniversary characters extremely disappointing, so let's put off ranting about that, and instead look at the current state of steamrolling general content with initiative setups. I do have pretty decent gear, a major deciding factor for whether you can one-shot any particular battle. Results may vary if you're less optimized. This was recorded with level 80 units before the level 90 update released. The extra 10 levels translate to about an overall damage increase of 25%. You may remember the auto-win setup, which probably didn't gain much traction on global, with people choosing to invest in more competitive units for tournament. It currently looks like this, with Zaskia's skill 2 providing a blue plus panel and item gauge to enable Academy Resna to item into double-stacked blue panels for the 3-turn clear. The damage is good enough for me with the rest of the units just carrying Memoria and not actually taking turns, but it's possible to work in other active support if you want to go 6 turns instead of 3. Looking at the setup, most is just standard supporter stuff, with Izana also carrying buff effect to boost her crit damage passive. It works with either Rose Val or Bride Izana as leader, though Izana, being slower, can carry better Memoria and gear without interfering with the turn order. I haven't had the chance to remake all my attacker gear yet, but with rank 5 of the Summer Promise Memoria, most units can probably run buff A traits instead of crit damage. We're using Zaskia here mainly for her blue panel generating skill 2, but her skill 1 is extremely broken in long fights like Tournament, making her possibly the most important supporter currently. Claudia and Heidi aren't strictly necessary here. Any characters that provide passive benefits would work, but with how high Resna's skill and crit damage are already, M-Attack should contribute the most. And they're also meta for magic comps, especially Claudia, so if you don't have them already, they're good candidates for sparking or selecting. Looking at the initiative landscape overall, the current leaders and their respective groups are like this. Ellie's Academy group is still mostly New Year Mary. The incoming AoE ice attacker Mary will give them access to a sweeper, but it has basically zero support to work with. For Rose Val, the Lantana group continues to sprawl, adding new supports with Bride Heidi and Zaskia, Agent Roman and Summer Resna as elemental debuffers, and various damage outputs. The main thing Lantana still lacks is received damage debuffers, though Johanna can now contribute single-target fizz debuffs. Next, we have Academy Ryza with the Kirkin group. Their 2 summer units gave them another strong magic debuffer and one of the best AoE sweepers. Ryza Initiative is really cohesive, rising to the top of the comps that I enjoy using. After that, we have Izana uplifting a lot of the base pool characters in Resna's story group. The latest Resnas, Summer Ryza, Zaskia, and Johanna all appear here as well, and though Lantana has more options overall, Izana contributes more herself compared to Rose Val. In addition, as demonstrated elsewhere, my girl Firis being in here and Judy as well, open up some unique options, but that's not entirely relevant to fast sweep setups. Finally, the newest Carefree Initiative group is driven by Anniversary Val. It's a pretty limited group so far, but it does have a ton of buffers, so maybe that can work for something. With that, it's time to blow some stuff up. We'll start with Ryza Initiative, my current go-to setup for pretty much all main content. It has the benefit of being all just Ryzas and Claudius, if that's your thing. It's quite capable of handling recent Risk 9 dungeons on auto, often without items like this Chapter 13 one you might recognize, with the cheap shot bat. Seems it's just extremely fast, but gets overtaken by actual initiative units, allowing us to pull the Uno reverse and delete the entire group before they get a turn. Some other fights you might be familiar with. 12-3's ice resistance proving insufficient against even just the team's innate ice down. And Ryza's penetration effect breaks through barrier gimmicks, like 13-4's bat group. I've been able to effortlessly auto-sweep almost all the fights from Chapter 12 through the latest Chapter 17, Score Battle and Dungeon, the main exception being the last one from Chapter 14 with a unique 100% barrier gimmick. In terms of the setup, the main thing is the speed tuning, since the various debuffs last for a different number of hits. You need base Claudia to be as fast as possible, her 3-hit debuff able to last until the main attack through all the others. She is quite slow by default, and needs both 11% Memoria and 12 speed accessory. Breaker Claudia's debuffs are 2-hit, but her 175 weight skill 2 requires running her with sub 4% Memoria and 0 speed accessory to not overtake base Claudia. Most of the gear is the standard Buffet M-Break plus debuff, or Reedfish supporter and breaker equip. When not using items, Ryza has a tarot to secure her crits, but she could use a tome otherwise. With items, we'll usually use a blue drink for crit, then 2 skill damage items, the group already being so stacked with debuffing. And finally, comparing the performance of the various setups against the same fight, chosen mostly for convenience and neutral resists against everything besides fire and slash. The gear isn't absolutely maxed for every setup, but it should give a decent reference at least. Starting off, a fast 3-turn with the Modern Academy duo and initiative provided by Izana. It's more or less the same setup as the first fight, just with AoE debuff items. Representing Roseval's Lantana group, we have an updated Izana comp. The fight's early red panels have been converted to Summer Resna's hat panels, which give a persisting party-wide 25% crit rate buff. Summer Resna can also burst from any hat panel, tagging the field with a magic damage taken debuff. In fights without the early red panels, you'd tune her to go after Val, her skill 2 providing AoE lightning resist down. We have Heidi and Zaskia on the buffs, some lightning down items, and between the hat panels and crit finish on an item, enough crit rate to roll with decent odds against 4 targets. Izana didn't previously have as much support to work with as a sweeper in Initiative, but she can post decent numbers nowadays, even without standard core units like Liddy, Wilbell, or Claudia. Ryza Initiative works the same here as it did in all the other fights earlier, and it takes the lead in damage. We've moved up the items to overwrite the red panels with crit panels ahead of Summer Ryza's turn. For Team Carefree, I tested this experimental manual comp that uses Summer Val's burst for the sweep. Her 300 weight skill 2 sets her first turn far back enough that all the other units can fit in an extra skill 1, pushing her to the burst panel before she ends the initiative round. The main issue with Summer Val is that there usually isn't a burst panel that you can reach so early, cutting off this game plan entirely. She could burst from any default blue panels that get converted into her float panels, but the first one of those is quite deep also. We've arranged the turn orders for Zaskia to set a blue plus panel for Val, who items from that into the burst. You can see the benefit of the Carefree group's supporter-heavy roster. Extra turns have stacked Val with various skill and crit damage, from their skill 1s and different gear effects. It's a strat that depends entirely on whether there are default panels to launch from, but when there are, Summer Val can put up pretty decent numbers. And bringing it full circle to the current meta, an awakened Resna setup using Firis Initiative. The healing ticks provided by Resna's gear allow her to awaken immediately in the initiative round. Then Firis's timing sets her behind Academy Rorona's first turn to receive the burst panel. Totori stacks further healing ticks to trigger Resna's post-awakening passive. Since the actual awakening requires using skill 2 once, we do need to wait for Resna's second turn and can't actually clear in initiative. On this particular fight hits you with a bunch of damage debuffs from the first wave of enemy attacks, and we unfortunately can't avoid these with Resna, so our final damage is artificially lowered by a lot. With the other healing items, we managed to stack 9 136% skill damage buffs before Resna bursts. There's a lot of overhead in this, basically using 3 character slots to get the right timing, but it does allow us to fire off Resna's burst with awakened buffs much earlier than normal. The final scores look like this, with the Ryza setup coming out on top while being simple and fully auto, which makes sense as it doesn't really need to make any concessions to shift into initiative, unlike the others that all require at least some compromise to even include the leader in the first place. Summer Val and Awakened Resna are both more suited for slower burns, and the normal tempo Izana comp still remains effective. But anyway, this isn't some Roman tournament, just use the units you like and enjoy. The rest is just the parties and gear, started editing in some EN trait name labels. It's quite tedious to do nicely, but hope it helps. Until next time, thanks for watching. The Firis Initiative setup from the previous fight, using Bride Izana for the leader skill, Firis for the initiative extension and timing, and Academy Rorona for the burst panel. We're using Totori's healing to try and trigger some buff stacks from Resna's passive after she awakens. Resna herself needs to receive 2 heals to fill the skill lamps for her skill 2, allowing her to awaken. We achieve this using the Roman Sword and Meru Pendant that grant regen at the start of battle. The Academy Resna and Ryza Initiative setups are more or less the same as the ones covered earlier, so refer to those to see what was being used. This is the Lantana setup with Izana as the sweeper. Never got around to making skill plus buff A gear for her since burst was optimal for tournament. We're using Resna's burst in this fight, so she has PM debuff gear, but with her normal skill 2, you'd give her lightning debuff instead. We've slowed Zaskia down a bit so that Resna can get a hat panel, and so she can set a blue panel for Izana. And here's the Carefree setup. The emphasis is on speed to fit in the skill ones before Summer Val's turn, and gear effects that can be triggered from the higher turn rate.